The lane to Hemphill Court, Gloucestershire, is as conscientiously shaded by elms as any self-respecting English drive might hope to be, though its respectability is marred just now by the presence of one William Cook, chauffeur, who has reversed the Daimler into a rhododendron bush and is using language wholly unsuitable for shrubbery. Lord Peter Death-Bredden Whimsy, leaning out of the back seat with casual elegance, observes the accident, the rhododendron, and the chauffeur's vocabulary in one languid sweep. "My dear Cook," he drawls, removing a beige fedora more suitable to Piccadilly than provincial Gloucestershire. "Polonius would remind you that brevity is the soul of wit, though I fancy he intended something a shade more pithy than your present disquisition on brake cables. Might we advance?" Cook, scarlet, produces an inarticulate growl, rights the motor, and proceeds up the gravel. Whimsy, having corrected Shakespeare to his own satisfaction, returns the hat to its stand inside the car, a gesture, incidentally, that ensures he will forget it entirely when later circumstances compel him to leave in unseemly haste. Hemphill Court itself, Elizabethan frontage grafted onto a perfectly earnest Georgian backbone, sits in the afternoon sun like an elderly county aunt wearing an unfortunate touch of rouge. Here resides Sir Julian Talboys, lately retired Deputy Under-Secretary at the Board of Trade and, by many accounts, one of those public men whose conscience sleeps profoundly if lulled by the phrase expedient in the national interest. From Talboys' letter, carried to Whimsy by an inspector too tactful to put anything criminal in writing, one gathers that a most disturbing family difficulty has arisen, and would Lord Peter be good enough to motor down for the weekend? Naturally, Talboys adds, no trouble to the household. Absolutely, absolutely none. Whimsy had allowed himself to be amused by the triple absolution. Experience teaches that when the English insist a thing is no trouble, it will involve corpses, scandal, or an extremely indelicate question about the tithes. He alights to the dull clang of the front door bell, whose tone, he notes, is a defeated B-flat, and is met by a butler so impressively emaciated that Whimsy's first charitable impulse is to ring for soup. Mr. Toppling, for such is the skeletal retainer's improbable name, ushers him through flagged passages redolent of beeswax and suppressed gossip. Halfway up the main staircase, a gracious double sweep with a suspicion of dry rot. There creeps upon the stillness a single scraping sound, the unmistakable, phlegmatic, bronchial kirk-kirk of someone coughing behind a closed door. Whimsy stops. Toppling stops. The cough stops. "Ahem," says Whimsy, articulating a cough of his own, thin and apologetic. One hears the music of the spheres, though that particular sphere appears somewhat asthmatic. Toppling's eyelids flicker. "Sir Julian's elder brother, my lord. Colonel Maurice Talboys. A chill contracted last week in the orchard. Quite trifling, sir." There is, in the pause after "sir," a suggestion that one might question the triflingness if one were vulgar enough. Whimsy only nods and continues upward. He has, of course, already filed the cough precisely 3 compartments deep. Physical ailment, potential alibi, and sound clue. Sir Julian awaits in a study hung with miniature portraits. Distant Talboys ancestors wearing expressions that combine civic virtue with mild dyspepsia. The Deputy Under-Secretary, silver-bearded and parchment-skinned, begins at once, eschewing pleasantries. "My sister-in-law is dead, Lord Peter." "I'm desolated to hear it," Whimsy murmurs, producing a monocle from his waistcoat as though the glass might somehow reflect condolence. "Catherine, that is, my brother Maurice's wife, was discovered early this morning at the foot of the back stairs, neck broken. The village doctor calls it misadventure. Maurice is, well, you will see. But I'm not satisfied. Something is wrong in the house." Whimsy, with a faint flick of the monocle, considers the fire irons, the carpet pattern, Saroque somewhat faded, and Sir Julian's hands, which worry a signet ring as though it were a puzzle. He says nothing. I have naturally notified the local police, Sir Julian continues. Inspector Grimswood, an efficient fellow in his sphere, but he inclines to simple explanations. My family, he lifts his chin toward those reproachful portraits, requires a little more subtlety. Subtlety, echoes Whimsy, as if tasting the word on the back of the palate. And so, you hope I may sniff the delicate bouquet beneath the obvious vintage. Very sensible. Tell me, do your back stairs often cause fatalities, or is this their maiden effort? Sir Julian looks pained at the levity, but presses on. Catherine was not well liked within the house. She had notions, alterations to the estate that notions frequently prove fatal. Whimsy agrees with airy gloom, particularly to those who haven't them. A tap at the door admits toppling once more. Inspector Grimswood, sir, he intones. Behind him shuffles a round man in a county tweed that would have embarrassed a fox. Inspector Grimswood bobbles respectfully at Whimsy, his courtesy tinged with the hope that an amateur lord will keep out of official hair. Lord Peter, he says, you'll be wanting to see the scene. We've left it untouched, for now. How cooperative of you, Whimsy replies, tilting his head like an inquisitive sparrow. Before we inspect staircases, may I bother you with a pedantic matter? All three men stare. Whimsy points to a gilt alarum clock on Sir Julian's desk. That timepiece, I fancy, still shows winter hours. You have not set it forward, yet your mantel clock, he swivels, is correct. A mild domestic incongruity, but I am a slave to such things. Shall we? Neither Sir Julian nor Grimswood can muster comment. Whimsy wafts toward the hall, pausing only to remove his gloves with unnecessary elegance. As they descend the main staircase, another dry, rattling cough echoes from the side wing. The same door, the same sound, a slight vibration in its finish that makes Whimsy's fingers still upon the banister. A cough on the landing, he muses aloud. What a threatening little overture to our tragedy. If one were to be poetical, which I promise I shan't, we might call it a nocturne in phthisic minor. They reach the foot of the back stairs, narrow, utilitarian, lit by a mullioned window flecked with ancient spider's work. At the bottom lies a collapsed screen of wickerwork, 2 hairpins and, at a discreet distance, a smear upon the flagstones that the most discreet observer might still recognize as blood. The balustrade, freshly dusted yet imperfectly so, shows a finger's breadth cleared through the sediment of polish. Whimsy crouches. Grimswood watches, resigned. A puff of dust here, Whimsy notes, and a smudge there, where a hem caught the banister perhaps. No, that would leave silk threads, and I see none. Dear me, how inconvenient reality insists on contradicting tidy fiction. He straightens and gazes upwards. Above, the stairwell narrows into darkness. Somewhere unseen, Colonel Maurice Talboys coughs once more, the sound fluttering down like a moth's wing. Whimsy smiles, a thin, speculative curve. Sir Julian, he says, almost gently, your family difficulty promises to be quite piquant. Let us hope it remains merely intellectual, though my experience recommends a stout pair of gloves and perhaps an umbrella for moral protection. Shall we begin with the household? I have such an appalling curiosity about servants' supper hours. And with that incongruous remark, the line delivered in a tone one might use to request tea, Lord Peter Whimsy steps lightly over the broken screen and into the shadow of the back stairs, where tragedy, domestic routine, and the faintest whisper of something altogether older than either seemed to be lying in wait. Whimsy advanced along the passage beyond the stairwell with the air of a man inspecting a curious but slightly overcooked entree. He paused only once, to glance sidelong at a print of The Death of Seneca hung too high and crooked. Its placement, he thought, perfectly emblematic of the English upper class's affection for stoic suffering, so long as it occurred tastefully and on the wall. Inspector Grimswood plodded behind, notebook in hand, his expression oscillating between professional courtesy and the apprehension of a man who suspects he may shortly be asked the precise diameter of a hat-pin. "Tell me, Inspector," Wimsey said, still not looking back. "Who found the body? One never knows whether to start with the corpse or the discoverer. I suppose the latter is, at least, more likely to answer questions." "Parlour-maid found her," Grimswood said, glancing at his notes. "Name of Ada Winchell. She was coming down early to light fires. 6:15, she says. Saw the body at the foot of the stairs, ran shrieking for the housekeeper. Scene's been untouched since. Except for Dr. Cathcart, of course. He made his usual brief examination. Neck snapped, he says. No signs of a struggle. Lady Talboys wore her night things under a silk robe." "Indeed, and I presume Lady Talboys was not in the habit of promenading the back stairs in dishabille?" "No, sir. Bit of a grand one, by all accounts. Always used the main staircase. Wouldn't even let the gardeners see her in her bathrobe, according to the scullery girl. Yet down she came, unobserved, on this particular night. Through the servants' wing, no less. That does suggest motivation," Wimsey mused. "Or perhaps compulsion. What was her room?" "Second floor, east corner, facing the yew terrace. Colonel Talboys is in the room beside hers. They shared a dressing room. Used to be a nursery, years ago." "Ah, a pre-war compromise. Spatial intimacy without emotional inconvenience. And the Colonel, poor man. How was he when you saw him?" Grimswood cleared his throat. "Quiet, my lord. Very quiet. Took the news with dignity. Didn't ask many questions." "Didn't ask." Wimsey halted, pivoted slightly. "A man's wife is discovered crumpled like an unlettered envelope at the foot of a staircase, and he inquires not at all into the when or how. That seems a trifle stoic, even by Gloucestershire standards. He said he hadn't heard anything. Sleeps with earplugs, sensitive to noise." "Does he indeed? And yet we all heard him coughing just now." The inspector looked up, startled. "Aye, yes, he does cough. Started last week. Could be chest catarrh, could be nerves. I wouldn't want to speculate." "Oh, I always speculate," said Wimsey cheerfully. "The trick is to do it quietly and never fall in love with your own theories. Now then, Miss Ada Winchell, where is she?" "Still in the servants' wing. Bit shaken, but the housekeepers kept her from going to pieces. I should very much like to go and see her. No need for fanfare. Let us sneak up like a creeping suggestion of duty." They retraced their steps through the back passage, avoiding the stairwell with the mild distaste one reserves for something simultaneously unpleasant and insoluble. Until, of course, it isn't. In the narrow corridor that led to the domestic quarters, the hush of morning gave way to the faint background of activity. The clink of crockery, the murmured exchange of grief too recent for embellishment. Wimsey found it oddly comforting, this echo of normality, the house's lungs still breathing, despite the death in its spine. The housekeeper, Mrs. Brigg, presented herself, at once, a woman built like a prayer book, solid, leather-bound, and full of moral instruction. She curtsied stiffly to Wimsey and offered to fetch the parlour-maid, if Ada's not too rattled. "She'll rattle less once she's spoken," Wimsey said gently. "But do send her in. Oh, and if I might see the room Lady Talboys used, there's a smell of motive about it." Mrs. Brigg sniffed, disapproving of the idiom, not the intention, and stalked away. A few moments later, Ada Winchell appeared. She was a small, wiry girl of about 19, with mouse-brown hair in neat rolls and the kind of pale, intelligent eyes one seldom finds below stairs unless accompanied by impertinence. Hers were not. She curtsied to Wimsey and twisted her hands in her apron. "I saw her, my lord. I saw her lying there. Her head was—" She stopped, swallowed. Her hair had come loose. I'd never seen her hair undone before. Not like that. "That must have been very shocking," Wimsey said kindly. "You were coming down for the fires?" "Yes, sir. I do the drawing room, the east hallway, and the blue parlor. I usually come down the back stairs to get coal from the scuttle on the landing. It saves time. Reasonable. And last night, did you hear anything? A noise? Footsteps? Ada frowned. I thought I heard a door bang, sir, maybe a minute before I came down. A sharp sound like wood on plaster. A door? Not a fall? No, sir. The fall... It sounded softer, if that makes sense. A thump. But the bang came before. Whimsy looked at Grimswood, who scribbled this dutifully. Ada, Whimsy continued, how did Lady Talboys usually treat the staff? Strict, sir. Not unkind, but she didn't like chatter. She had rules. Certain linens on Tuesdays. Flowers only from the south garden. Never the herb bed. She said it smelt too like soup. And she didn't like Mr. Gerald in the library. Mr. Gerald? The secretary, sir. Her husband's secretary. Interesting. Did she say why? No, sir. But she had a way of going silent if he came into the room. Cold-like. She once made Mrs. Briggs send his tea back, said it was tepid. But it was hot. I just poured it. And Mr. Gerald, what is his arrangement here? He has the old governess's room above the library. Keeps to himself, walks in the mornings. I think he writes poetry. Mrs. Briggs says he's the brooding type. Is he indeed? All brooding types must account for their whereabouts. Thank you, Ada. You've been very helpful. Dismissed. Ada bobbed and left with a backward glance, half nervous, half proud. Whimsy turned to Grimswood. Did you hear the bang when you entered the house this morning? No, sir. Then it likely came from Lady Talboys' descent, or some interaction just prior. A slammed door, perhaps, or someone leaving in haste. Might we now view the bedroom? Grimswood led the way to the east wing, where the corridors widened, carpets thickened, and silence became ceremonial. Lady Talboys' room was elegant in the way money likes to impersonate taste. A touch heavy, with mauve damask curtains drawn back to frame the French doors and a bureau gleaming with polish. Whimsy walked slowly, his eyes alert for what was wrong rather than what was there. He passed the dressing table, a scatter of silver brushes, cold cream, and a bottle of eau de cologne that had tipped slightly, leaving a ghostly ring on the tray. The bed was untouched. The robe, saffron silk, lay neatly over a chair. A book, The Silent Companions, sat open on the bedspread, face down. He stopped before the dressing-room door. This connects to the Colonel's room? Yes, sir. Is he resting? He's refused all visitors. Quite. Then let's not disturb him. One thing more, Inspector. The French doors. Locked or unlocked? Grimswood checked. Bolted from inside. Ah, curious. She left through this room, dressed only in her night things, yet took pains to ensure the external doors were secure. Whimsy gazed for a moment at the window, watching a bird pick delicately through the yew hedge. Then he turned abruptly. Let us have a word with Mr. Gerald, I think, and perhaps take a constitutional walk to the orchard. I'm beginning to suspect this house has more than one back staircase. Whimsy quitted the bedchamber with the faintest inclination of his head, as though thanking an invisible usher for a tolerable performance, and proceeded down the gallery to the old schoolroom staircase. The housekeeper's keys jingled behind them, but he showed no haste, pausing now and then to study water-stained ceilings, the angle of a picture hook, or a faint bloom of mildew on a corner cornice. Each pause nettled Inspector Grimswood, who felt every second erode the fresh edges of evidence. Yet he followed, recognizing that the amateur's dawdle often concealed a professional speed of thought. At the foot of a narrower stair they turned into the library, once the nursery, its high windows now curtained in bottle-green velvet. A single desk lamp cast a monkish glow upon a long mahogany table. Behind it sat Mr. Basil Gerald, sharpening a pencil as though paring down an intrusive notion. He was somewhere in his early 30s. Compact, heavily bespectacled, the sort of man one might forget instantly until one noticed the intensity with which he forgot the rest of the world. Whimsy advanced till the lamplight lit the crown of his fair hair. "Good morning, Mr. Gerald. I'm afraid the circumstances forbid pleasantries, but I hope we may borrow a morsel of your time." Gerald rose, eyes swimming behind glass. "Of course, my lord. Inspector." His voice, like damp parchment, betrayed neither eagerness nor alarm. Yet Whimsy observed the right hand slide, fractionally, to cover a blotting pad. The sleeve cuff showed a brownish streak, too dark for ink, too green for dust. Whimsy filed it with a private flourish under soil, organic, orchard. "We gather," Whimsy said lightly, "that Lady Talboys and you did not enjoy unanimous tastes in tea temperatures." A twitch, quickly mastered. Lady Talboys was particular in matters domestic, as is any hostess of standing. "Indeed, and professionally your relations were cordial." "I work for the Colonel, not her ladyship. Colonel Talboys requires his correspondence handled, his diaries transcribed. My duties do not include the domestic branch." "A pity. Domestic branches can be surprisingly fruitful." Whimsy glanced at a pile of carbon copies tied with green tape. "You labor late, I collect." "Frequently." Gerald's gaze flicked to the lamp. "Last night until, 1:30. Sir Julian needs a memorandum for Monday's committee." 1:30. Whimsy turned to Grimswood. "Dr. Cathcart placed death at roughly, between midnight and 2? "Closer to 1, the inspector confirmed. "Body still warm, rigor incomplete." Whimsy returned to Gerald. "So you were awake, within 40 paces of the back stairs, some minutes after Lady Talboys fell. Did you hear anything?" Gerald's breath came shallow. Tiny rings fogged his spectacles. The wind thumped a sash. I closed the shutter. "Nothing else?" "No cough." "A cough?" Gerald appeared genuinely blank. "Colonel Talboys suffers a troublesome bronchial unrest. Yet you, engaged in night work adjacent to his rooms, noticed nothing?" "No, my lord." "How sound these country walls become," Whimsy murmured. Then, more briskly, "You were at your desk continuously." "I stepped out once, about 1 o'clock, for a glass of water, from the pantry at the end of the hall. Glasses leave rings. Might we witness the ring?" Gerald hesitated. "I washed it, sir." "Efficient." Whimsy bestowed the word with faint applause. "And afterward, did you retire directly to bed?" "I wrote another half hour, then turned in." "Would you oblige us with your shoes, Mr. Gerald?" Even Grimswood cocked an eyebrow. Gerald flushed but complied, slipping out of neat Oxford lace-ups. Whimsy lifted one, inspected the welt. A crust of soil clung between the treads, dull with moss-green flecks. "Thank you. Inspector, you will note the orchard path is turfed with precisely this friable clay. Mr. Gerald, when did you last venture among the apples?" "This morning. I take a constitutional at 6. "At 6, Whimsy repeated, weighing syllables as though tasting wine. "The body had been found by then. You walked despite the commotion?" "I took a different route, by the paddock." "Yet your souls disagree." Whimsy replaced the shoe delicately. "An early stroll clears the head, though some find murder sufficient for that." Color mounted in Gerald's cheeks. "Are you accusing me?" "My dear man, I never accuse, merely annotate." "Allow me another annotation. This library clock," Whimsy pointed to a bracket timepiece, "is 9 minutes behind Sir Julian's desk clock, which itself languishes an hour in the past. A household fond of asynchronous machinery." "Curious," Grimswood interjected. "We shall want a formal statement, sir." "Of course." Gerald's tone had iced over. "I have nothing to hide." "Capital. Truth is always so transparent. One sees straight through it to the uncertainties beyond." Whimsy bowed and led the inspector back into the passage, where Mrs. Briggs' keys still clacked like distant castanets. Only when 2 doors separated them from the library did Whimsy speak. One red herring has obligingly flopped across the deck. Gerald's motive, dislike, perhaps dismissal, seems too pat. Yet someone left by the orchard in the night. Someone lay in wait or lured her there. He could have, Grimswood muttered. Letters, maybe. Secret meeting gone wrong. Yes, an obliging secret meeting. But why ascend again and pitch her downstairs instead of leaving nature to finish its chill work? A fall is tidy domestic drama. The orchard at midnight is Gothic opera. Whimsy flicked lint from his cuff. Let us test distance. From Lady Talboys' bedroom to the orchard gate at a reasonable stealth walk. How long, you think? 2 minutes out, 2 back. Grant 3. She in slippers. Timepiece of the library says 1:21 when Gerald closes shutter. He fetches water by 1:23. He hears nothing after. Lady descends perhaps at 1:30 and falls. That fits the doctor's half-hour leeway. His eyes brightened. But add this. The bang Ada heard occurs a minute before she takes the stairs at 6:15. That is nearer dawn. Something or someone disturbed the scene after the fact. Someone moving the body, or staging the accident more artfully. Dust wiped from the banister, an afterthought, perhaps to erase an earlier drag mark. We must verify. Whimsy quickened his pace. Inspector, would you indulge a breath of the Gloucestershire air? In the courtyard, a thin sunlight filtered between clouds, striking the windows like pale lantern light. They followed a gravel path round the herbaceous border. Whimsy's shoes whispered over the grit. The orchard lay beyond a wrought-iron gate, gnarled apple trees contorted like aged dancers. A damp patch of grass showed 2 sets of boot prints, one small, one larger, crossing, circling, retreating. Colonel's gumboots, Grimswood murmured, kneeling. See the chevrons. And these, Gerald's Oxfords, I fancy. Whimsy pointed to a finer oval tread. Deep, dew-sharp, made before sunrise, thus before discovery, but the gumboot tracks overlay them facing inward. Colonel out after Gerald returned. We have a little promenade of secrets. Grimswood frowned. Colonel's ill, chest like paper. Even the sick take midnight air when conscience troubles respiration, Whimsy replied. He stooped beneath a low branch. There, snagged on bark, fluttered a thread of saffron silk. He captured it gingerly. Our lady came this way. Why leave a warm house wearing only a robe? Rendezvous, threat, or curiosity, any could coax her. Beside the branch lay a cigarette butt, foreign and pungent. Whimsy sniffed. Abdullah's. Turkish, expensive. Colonel smokes rough shag. Gerald a pipe. Sir Julian, cheroots. Who then? Grimswood looked baffled. Guest? A guest unrecorded, or a servant with expensive tastes. We must inspect the ashtrays. Whimsy pocketed the butt. Come, let us call upon Colonel Talboys. They re-entered through the east veranda, crossing a parquet corridor where sunstripes flared, coffin-like, across the floor. At the Colonel's door, Whimsy tapped lightly. No answer. A second rap produced a hoarse, "Come." The room smelled of camphor and stale tobacco. Colonel Maurice Talboys sat in an armchair, blanket over knees, complexion the color of cold mutton. His eyes, red-rimmed and irritable, fixed on the intruders. Apologies, Colonel, Whimsy began, voice gentled as though addressing a startled horse, but certain points of time and place require your unique acquaintance. I was told my wife fell, the Colonel said, each word threaded with phlegm. What more is there? Always something. For instance, your night. You retired when? 11. I took laudanum for the cough. Slept badly. Badly enough to walk in the orchard near 4? The Colonel's blanket twitched. Ridiculous. I can barely manage the corridor. Yet we have your gumboot impressions, fresh upon the dew. A pause like a held breath. Then the Colonel coughed violently, turning his face from them. I did go, he muttered at last. Needed air. Couldn't breathe. I walked a bit. Alone? Yes. Did you meet your wife? No. The denial came too fast. I didn't know. God, I didn't know she was out. His voice cracked on the final word, and he closed his eyes. Spent. Whimsy regarded him without triumph. One last trifle, Colonel. Do you smoke, Abdullahs? No. Catherine did. Now and then. She fancied herself. Continental. I see. Rest, sir. We shall trouble you again only if necessity trumpets. With a courteous nod, Whimsy withdrew. In the corridor, Grimswood exhaled. So she met someone, perhaps to share a cigarette. Colonel sees them? Jealous quarrel, push. Tempting scenario, but we tread thin ice over muddy water, Whimsy said. Colonel's illness limits violent exertion. A struggle sufficient to break a neck. Doubtful. An accomplice, perhaps. Meanwhile, the clock questions persist. Why so many misset movements? They form a little discordance. One suspects deliberate. And Gerald. Gerard may chronicle the discord rather than compose it. He smiled wryly. Inspector, do you believe in ghosts? Grimswood blinked. Can't say I do. Nor I, yet there is a spectre here. Call it mistimed chance. When one encounters a house where every clock lies, one expects the truth keeps equally poor hours. Let us pursue it, beginning with Sir Julian's memorandum. If Gerald composed it, the carbon may reveal whether he truly worked until 1:30. He glanced toward the study wing. Come, we shall borrow a magnifying glass and take a sermon from the typewriter. Make haste, before the house sets its timepieces right and our little ghosts vanish with the dusting. They set off again, footsteps echoing down the polished corridor, each stride carrying them deeper into the labyrinth of Hemphill Court's silences. Silences that now pulsed with half-heard coughs, clandestine footsteps, and the ticking of a dozen dishonest clocks. The small passage to Sir Julian's study smelled faintly of pipe ash and beeswax, as though a colonial club had been condensed into 20 paces. Whimsy, walking fingertip light along the wainscot, felt rather than heard the subdued hum of clocks ticking at dissonant intervals behind the walls. The house's pulse was irregular, like a patient hiding palpitations from his physician. When they reached the study door, he paused, laid his palm flat to the panel, and nodded to Grimswood. The inspector, who had learned that a whimsy pause usually preceded discovery, watched in silence. Inside, late afternoon glazed the room's leather bindings. A Remington portable sat open on a side table, its carriage pushed home but ribbon still half wound in crimson and black. Alongside lay a sheaf of onion-skin carbon copies, Gerald's memorandum for Sir Julian, securely tied but, by unlucky chance, one corner trapped beneath the typewriter's near-side rubber foot. Whimsy knelt, easing the paper free with delicate forefinger and thumb. "You see, Inspector," he murmured, "the carbon is cool to the touch. Type a while, and the paper warms slightly. Leave it an hour, and every sheet chills to room spite. Gerald swore he finished at 1:30, but this stack is already as cold as the Colonel's welcome. Let us consider the platen." He rotated the platoon knob an inch and sniffed. Ink just beginning to dry at the edges. Roughly 2 hours since imprint, perhaps 3. Call it midnight. Our clerk tarried in verse composition afterwards, or in orchard rendezvous. Grimswood inspected the top sheet. Timestamp here. Memorandum completed 00.05. Very neat of him. Entirely too neat. Men bent on night labor seldom pause to double-space signatures. Whimsy's fingernail traced the date line. Yet his alibi stands or stumbles on that formality. Suppose he finished near midnight, left for the orchard, met Lady Talboys, she in silk, he in romantic ardor or angry quarrel, and she died between 1 and 2. Gerald re-enters, sees hazard, decides to falsify a later working time. He returns to the Remington, adds a page header, punches carriage twice for verisimilitude, and retires. Unfortunately, ink enthralls the chronologist. It will dry whether one fibs or not. Grimswood grunted appreciative skepticism. Then why not simply say he went to bed at 12:30? He's no obvious fear of us. Not of us, perhaps. Fear often grows locally, like mold when one lives among the Talboys. But let us widen the circle. Whimsy stood, drifting toward the chimney-piece where Sir Julian's clock still lagged. See, our friend the Deputy Under-Secretary maintains official lateness. An hour slow. Why? He depends on punctual trains, cabinet telegrams. Yet he chooses to inhabit false time. I suspect a campaign, not a carelessness. He took up the clock, turned it to expose the back, and whistled. A small brass key lay jammed behind the movement, as though shoved there in haste. He withdrew it, tested the bit on the winding arbor, and found it matched. Someone adjusted him, Whimsy said softly, then thrust key out of sight to deter reversing. Now why should anyone in this household crave an alibi padded by 60 minutes? He replaced the clock, ensuring its limp tick continued, and opened the French window beyond the desk. A square of lawn, already lengthening with shadow, gave on to the carriage drive. On the gravel lay tracks of Sir Julian's slippers, short, outward pointing. Sir Julian informs World and Household that he retired at 11. Shift his clock back an hour, and he retires at midnight by honest Greenwich. Slip beyond the window at 12:15, commit some small mischief, and at inquiry claim innocence. I was abed by 11, Inspector. The clock, if checked, swears to it. Grimswood's pencil froze half down the margin. You think Sir Julian set it himself? That would be too simple. And he is not. I think an active mind perceives his timidity and exploits it. Far neater to nudge an honest man's timepiece than to build one's own. Observe, the mantel supports only 2 frames. Lady Talboys in wedding satin and a cabinet dinner photograph of Sir Julian. A sentimental pair. Tamper with the clock and Sir Julian will not meddle. He dare not be reminded of lateness where marriage is concerned. Whimsy snapped his pocket watch shut. Let us join him. Perhaps the cabinet discipline in him will twitch. They found the former Under-Secretary in a faded Chesterfield chair under a bookcase of blue books, his expression that of a man petitioning Providence for a procedural adjournment. Whimsy approached with a sigh of regretful politeness. My dear Sir Julian, forgive intrusion. 1-minute question, literally, alas, about minutes. Your clock runs an hour behind Westminster. Did you set it thus? Sir Julian blinked, then looked genuinely perplexed. Behind, can it be? I've been so occupied. Terrible day, perhaps the mechanism slipped. Clocks rarely loiter so precisely. Might anyone have turned it? I cannot imagine who would trouble. Toppling wins it on Sundays. Whimsy nodded. Then I would instruct Toppling to keep future guardianship. Confusion of time breeds confusion of conscience. It is easy, when the night is long, to borrow an hour one never repays. He offered a gentle bow and retreated, leaving Sir Julian clutching both armrests as if the furniture, at least, might remain punctual. Back in the passage, Grimswood exhaled. If neither Gerald nor Sir Julian admits, we're still scratching, he muttered. We scratch, we sniff, we deduce, Whimsy said. Next, we sample acoustics. I fancy the back stairwell may offer curious echoes after midnight. He led the way once more toward the service corridor, but their progress halted as they nearly collided with Toppling himself, stalking with pained dignity and a silver salver held at the precise angle advertising the absence of sherry. Seeing them, the butler hesitated, as though deciding which impertinence to rebuke first. Major Talboys, he began in hushed bass, requests. Then he stopped, startled, realizing the colonel was the only major in living memory, and the colonel did not request anything at present beyond laudanum. Forgive me, my lord, he murmured, recovering. I am distracted. Understandably, Whimsy said, but his stare fixed upon the empty salver. Fetching or returning, Mr. Toppling? Returning, sir. A rare spasm tightened the thin cheeks. Her ladyship's salver from last evening. She took cocoa in her dressing room at 10:30. I thought she preferred Abdullah's. The cocoa was mine, my lord. His gaze flickered, almost defensive. She complained of the colonel's cough affecting her rest. Whimsy took the salver. A faint ring remained. Palish, not chocolate, but perhaps milky tea. He sniffed. Nutmeg, sugar, and a whisper of brandy. Fortifying against nocturnal draughts, he said. Thank you. Did you observe whether her ladyship drank it all? Not entirely. I found the cup still quarter full when I collected the tray at 8 this morning. I have not yet washed it. He produced the cup from beneath the silver cover. The dregs of a frothy beverage clung to porcelain. Grimswood brightened. We'll have that tested, he said. Sleeping draught? Whimsy swirled the residue. A faint sparkle clung to the rim. Egg yolk foam, he said, but note granules, powder not quite dissolved. He touched a particle to his tongue, then grimaced. Epsom salts, possibly to settle digestion or to produce mild purgation. Mrs. Brigg prescribes it to undermaids. Toppling bowed his head. Her ladyship requested it herself. She often suffered. From what? Restlessness, she said, and melancholy. A silence opened. Toppling's face worked as though containing words. Whimsy waited. Begging pardon, my lord. The butler went on, voice suddenly fragile, but her ladyship feared this house. She believed, he swallowed, she believed someone watched her. From the stairs. Someone, Whimsy repeated softly. She said 2 nights past she woke to see a figure on the landing quite still. She called, but it vanished. No servant owned to it. A cough on the landing, and now a ghost. Whimsy's expression did not change, yet the gleam in his eyes sharpened. Thank you, Mr. Toppling. You have done well. We shall trouble you no further unless the cups demand confession. Toppling retreated. Grimswood busied himself capping the sample vial. Salt or drug? Maybe someone doctored the cocoa, expecting her to be weak. Slip-on stairs. Possibly. Yet an unconscious body falls differently. Neck seldom breaks cleanly. Whimsy paced 2 steps, head lowered. We must identify the watcher. A household phantom is convenient camouflage for a flesh-and-blood stalker. Let us interrogate architectural memory. They returned to the main stair, descending into the back well where dusk now pooled. Whimsy rapped knuckles against the panelled newel, listening. Hollow. There's void behind. In older houses, a service lift or dumb waiter sometimes ran behind such panelling. Could a person stand concealed, peeping through? He bent close to a carved rosette. Behind the deepest groove gaped a pinprick of darkness. A knot drilled out, he whispered, just large enough for an eye. He straightened and clapped his hands once. The sound echoed strangely, doubling as though another stair, parallel but unseen, returned the note. A false passage, Inspector. We must find its door. Up they went, step by step, listening for hollow resonance. Halfway, Whimsy pressed a discolored square of oak. It yielded a fraction, releasing stale air scented with dust. A panel slid aside, revealing a narrow shaft with corkscrewed steps rising between lath and stud. An 18th-century bell-hanger's stair for servants to scurry unseen. Grimswood whistled. Perfect spying place. And sounding board for coughs, Whimsy said. The colonel's room lies adjacent. If he rose and leaned here, one would hear every rattle. But who else knows of it? He ducked inside, torch in hand, and climbed. The spiral was close as a chimney, thin dust swirling under his breath. Halfway up he paused, stooping to inspect something caught on a nail, a shred of saffron silk. Higher still, a stub of Turkish cigarette lay flattened on a tread. He emerged onto a cramped landing behind the second-floor corridor. Narrow slits admitted wafer light. Through one slit, he could see the Colonel's door. Through another, Lady Talboys. From a third, the library, a simple network of observation posts. When he descended, his clothes dust-streaked, Grimswood waited at the opening. Whimsy stepped out and slid the panel shut. The seam vanished into carved foliage. "We have our ghost," he said. "A fleshly ghost with expensive tobacco and knowledge of forgotten architecture. Gerald smokes a pipe. The Colonel wheezes too much for ladders. Sir Julian, not agile. Toppling. Possible. Yet he smelled not of Abdullahs, but of starch and resignation." "And the watcher's motive?" Grimswood asked. "Control. Fear. Perhaps love curdled to surveillance." Whimsy's smile held no amusement. "We require a demonstration. Tonight we post ourselves here, Inspector, at the stroke of whichever hour we choose to believe. We will bait our ghost with silence." Grimswood nodded, already tasting victory. "And if he, or she, returns?" Whimsy's eyes glittered. "Then, my dear Inspector, we shall cough on the landing." The house dined under a cloud, each course carried in on a hush as thick as the parsleyed cream. Sir Julian picked at his sole. Gerald kept one hand beneath the table, fingers twitching at invisible typewriter keys. The Colonel's chair remained empty, a mute witness covered with a folded napkin. Conversation flickered only when Mrs. Brigg announced pudding, and even that provoked merely a hollow compliment from Whimsy about the courage of a cook who attempted spun sugar in wartime sugar rations, promptly corrected by Sir Julian, who reminded him the armistice was now 7 years past. Whimsy apologized, eyes bright, but it was Grimswood who noticed Gerald's mouth move as though repeating the dates to himself, converting history to mental shorthand. At 9, the party scattered, Sir Julian to write letters, Gerald nominally to draft a fresh précis, and Toppling to marshal the nightly locking up. Whimsy strolled the library on a pretext of checking an obscure blue book citation. In truth, he watched, as a naturalist watches a wood's edge. For the moment, habits reassert themselves when no one believes he is looking. Gerald lasted precisely 11 minutes before slipping out with a sheaf of papers and a small brass torch. He crossed the inner courtyard toward the service wing, disappearing by the lower larder door. Grimswood emerged from behind debates and proceedings with a look of canine expectancy. "Shall we tail him?" "Presently," Whimsy murmured. "Our bird will circle back. Poetry seldom thrives near pickled onions. We should take roost ourselves." They left the library, skirts of darkness licking at corridor corners, and gained the back stair where Whimsy pressed the concealed latch. Inside the secret shaft, the air smelled of cold plaster and ancient bees' nests. Grimswood, broad-shouldered, barely fitted the corkscrew treads. Whimsy proceeded, stepping on the edges to keep dust whispers to a minimum. At the first landing, Whimsy produced a pocket torch pinholed by cardboard to a slit of light. Through the peephole opposite, Colonel Talboys' door glimmered half open, a lamplight wedge revealing part of the sick man's bed. The Colonel coughed once, dry, exhausted, and a nurse's shadow leaned over him. Whimsy blinked. He had not known a nurse had been summoned, but her presence, brisk and uniformed, suggested Sir Julian's sudden exertion of duty. Farther up the stair, a second slit revealed the passage to the library. All was dim. Whimsy gestured to Grimswood and touched a finger to his lips. They waited. Time crawled, measured only by distant mantle chimes, never quite agreeing with one another. At last, soft footfalls came, the light, precise rhythm of someone accustomed to moving silently. Gerald materialized in the corridor below, crossing the strip of lamplight from a wall sconce. He paused outside the Colonel's room, listening, then continued toward the main staircase. Whimsy's hand tightened on Grimswood's arm. Not yet. Minutes later, a second figure appeared. Toppling. The butler crept more furtively than dignity allowed, carrying nothing but an envelope. He halted where Gerald had stood, pressed the envelope beneath the colonel's door, and retreated. His head turned once, uneasy, and he seemed about to cough, but mastered it. Then he vanished down the servant's stair. Whimsy's whisper was barely breath. Curious, messages posted night shift fashion, and our ghost still to come. They remained. It must have been midnight when the house settled into that peculiar stillness, which is not silence but an orchestral resting note. Wind ticking, the occasional timber creak. Whimsy sensed rather than heard movement inside the shaft, particle dust disturbed above. He nudged Grimswood downward a step, extinguishing the torch. A faint scuff, someone descending the hidden stair from the attic exit. In darkness they waited until a shape loomed. Slim, robed, breathing quickly. Whimsy coughed, a deliberate, flat report. The figure froze. Grimswood's bull torch burst alight, blinding white. Ada Winchell's face appeared ghost pale, a dust smear across one cheek, and an unlit Turkish cigarette between her fingers. She tried a shriek. Whimsy's hand closed gently over her mouth. "Steady, my dear. One panics only if guilty, and we are not yet apportioning guilt, merely information." He released her. She sagged against the wall, heart thudding loud enough to echo. I only meant to look," she whispered. "Excellent. We are door-lookers. What did you hope to see?" Ada drew breath. "Her ladyship. Last night I thought I heard her." Tears glimmered but did not fall. "I've heard her twice since she died. Footsteps, the robe rustling." I went up to the attic stair to watch. "The stair you have plainly known for some while." "I found it cleaning dustings last month." She swallowed. "Lady Talboys found it too. She asked me never to speak of it. She used to come here after others slept. Said she could hear the house breathing secrets." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Grimswood. "Did she smoke these Abdullahs?" He tapped the cigarette. "She did. And sometimes—" Ada hesitated. "Sometimes I'd pinch one." She laughed. Said a maid who could appreciate a Turkish blend might appreciate other sophistications. Her voice trembled on the edge of loyalty and fear. "You heard her last night. You are certain?" "I heard her door open. The silk of that robe sounds like tearing spider webs. Then a step, then nothing. I waited. I thought if I could see, maybe help. But she never came. I fell asleep on the stair. When I woke it was nearly dawn. I ran to light fires and found—" She broke off, covering her face. Grimswood softened fractionally. "All right, lass. You'll give a statement." He guided her down the shaft toward the panel. When she had gone, Whimsy remained, eyes narrowed in the torch's glow. Lady Talboys watched from here. She knew she was watched in turn. A hall of mirrors, inspector, each observer spied upon by another. They descended and stepped into the corridor. Whimsy shut the panel with surgical care. Far off, a bell tinkled. The night nurse summoning assistance. Both men hurried toward the colonel's room, but inside they found only the nurse bending over an empty bed, sheets twisted, window thrown wide. "He insisted on the lavatory," she cried, then bolted like a hare. "I can't chase him. The poor gentleman will kill himself." Grimswood charged for the landing, but Whimsy darted instead to the service corridor. "He cannot manage stairs," he muttered. "He'll seek the shortest path out, a wheel ramp by the pantry door." They ran, footsteps drumming. At the courtyard arch they caught the flutter of a dressing-gowns disappearing into moonlit orchard gloom. Colonel Talboys lurched beneath the apple boughs, breath rasping, one hand clutching his chest. Whimsy called gently, "Colonel, you need air, yes, but not Winters at 2 a.m. The man turned, wild-eyed. Moonlight revealed a revolver shaking in his fist. "Stay back!" His voice ripped raw. "I will not be hauled to spectacle. She's gone, my Kate. Ask them why she crept about at night. Ask them what they wrote." Whimsy raised both palms. "We intend to ask, believe me. but truth prefers living witnesses. The colonel's knees buckled, the pistol dropped soundlessly into grass. Grimswood caught him under the arms. As they steadied him, something slid from his pocket, a thin sheet of onion skin, typing faint on its pale surface. Gerald's memorandum page. Wimsey stooped, reading in the torch beam. Arrangements to adjust settlement pending Lady T's signature should remain confidential. He folded the sheet. Settlement, as in money, Inspector. A codicil, perhaps, altering inheritance, requiring her consent. He patted the colonel's shoulder. You found this tonight? The colonel's eyelids fluttered. Found it, slipped under my door. Guess who wanted her signature while she lay cold? The nurse hurried up with smelling salts. Grimswood signaled constables. Wimsey pocketed the onion skin. A will contested, a codicil unsigned, a houseful of clocks falsified, and a lady wandering secret stairs, fearful of unseen eyes. He looked toward the upper windows where lamplight trembled like a trapped soul. We come, Inspector, to the center of the web. Let us, before dawn, pluck one more strand and see which spider shivers. Wimsey accompanied the stretcher party only as far as the side porch, where Colonel Talboys was lifted indoors and swaddled in blankets like a feverish crusader brought home from the wars. The nurse bustled. Grimswood issued low orders, and toppling, summoned out of nowhere, produced a decanter of brandy and 2 cut-glass goblets without ever admitting whose instruction he obeyed. When the immediate drama had subsided, doctor telephoned, windows shut, constable posted. Wimsey slipped the onion skin from his pocket and re-examined it beneath a wall sconce. The sheet bore a single paragraph, faintly typed, with Gerald's initials below. It advised Colonel Talboys to expedite the revision to the marriage settlement in favor of Captain Simon Talboys, forthwith upon Lady Talboys' affixation of signature. A line of penciled figures, some large, some struck through, marred the margin. Wimsey tapped each digit with forefinger and thumb, counting under his breath. The sum, once added, exceeded a comfortable fortune. It also dwarfed the portion certified in Debrett's for the colonel's branch of the family. Where, he wondered, did such numbers grow? He folded the sheet and found Grimswood at the foot of the stair, wiping orchard mud from his shoes with a handkerchief too clean to survive. Colonel's stable now, the inspector grunted. Doctor'll dose him with codeine and strap the chest. Might keep him from sprinting orchards, but we'll post a man just in case. Post a man by all means, Wimsey said, but choose one quietly heroic. We may yet require another charge through the undergrowth. He leaned closer. I must question Gerald again, alone if possible. He and Sir Julian both stand on slippery ledges, but Gerald is nearer the drop. Grimswood considered, then nodded. His room's above the library. I'll keep Sir Julian engaged downstairs. Say a written statement. You've half an hour. Wimsey mounted the main staircase, pausing where moonlight still silvered the banister. The smear of wiped dust they had noted earlier was now a dull handprint, clearer and lower than before. Someone had steadied themselves here since the evening's bustle. Someone shorter, lighter than Gerald. Wimsey pressed his own, palm to the mark, and smiled thinly. Another visitor to the scene of revelation, he thought, and continued upward. At the governess's old room, a soft glow leaked from beneath the door. Wimsey rapped gently. A startled sound answered. Paper rustling, a drawer sliding. Then Gerald's voice, calm yet stiff. Come. The room smelled of stale pipe smoke and linseed. Manuscripts lay in regimented piles, held by brass weights in the shape of owls. Gerald himself sat at a narrow desk, spectacles glinting, his ink-stained fingers clasped as though to still a tremor. Across his knee rested a rolled carpet bag. If that bag is intended for flight, Wimsey remarked, you will find GPO vans faster and less conspicuous. Still, the instinct is laudable. Gerald did not rise. I am packing for London. Sir Julian may still require me at the Board of Trade on Monday. Sir Julian, I suspect, will require a solicitor instead. But let us discuss Monday by and by. I've read your memorandum regarding the settlement. Whimsy placed the onion skin on the blotter. You can spare me the preamble about sensitivity. Explain, rather, why Lady Talboys was asked to sign away her own fortune and why that signature was still being requested after her death. Gerald absorbed the words without blinking. Behind the lenses, the pupils tightened. I do not know who posted that page. I completed the memorandum a week ago. It merely summarizes advice from Sir Julian's bankers. The Colonel stands to inherit certain funds, contingent on Lady Talboys' consent. If she predeceased him without signing, the inheritance would, in equity, pass to her cousin, Captain Simon. Sir Julian wished to avoid a lawsuit. Equity. That charming mirage which lures honest men into quicksand. Captain Simon, I gather, is less than affluent. Substantial debts. Gerald's tone had cooled to clerkly recitation. If the Colonel relinquished a portion, the Captain's pressing obligations would be settled, the remainder reverting on trust to any child the Colonel might adopt. Except the Colonel has no child. No. A brief silence. But they had recently applied to the Home Office to foster a boy displaced by the Irish troubles. Lady Talboys thought it charitable. Whimsy paced once to the wardrobe and back. Charity requires witness signatures, yet Lady Talboys refused hers. Why? Gerald swallowed. She believed Captain Simon's debts disreputable. Gaming, women, colonial schemes. She said mercy misapplied became complicity. Commendably stern. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. You typed this page at midnight, or so your carbon copy pretends. When did you last see Lady Talboys alive? At dinner, 9 o'clock. You did not encounter her later. Perhaps on a midnight stroll past the orchard? No. The Abdullah cigarette found on the secret stair? Lady Talboys kept them. I am a pipe smoker. Indeed. Yet your coat, examined at lunch, bore flecks of orchard muck. Where did you tread? Gerald's hands unclasped. The right formed half a fist. I walked at dawn, as I said. I needed air. Is that all? For the moment. Whimsy inclined his head. Pack your bag if you must, but remain within reach, and beware the temptation to reset clocks. The house is already thick with false hours. He left Gerald staring at the onion skin as though it were a scorpion in a specimen jar and descended to the ground floor. Grimswood emerged from Sir Julian's study, eyebrow raised. He talks freely enough, the inspector murmured, but he swears he never touched his clock. Claims he retired before 11 and read Cicero till sleep. So Cicero now sits in the dock, Whimsy said. Very salutary for the old fellow. Sharpens oratory. He drew the inspector aside. We must examine Captain Simon's accounts. Is he abroad? Egypt, I think. Survey Corps. Cable tomorrow. Do so. Meanwhile, summon a fingerprint man from Gloucester, the Abdullah butt, the secret stair tread, the salver cup. Handle nothing further until he arrives, and post a constable outside Gerald's door. On suspicion? On inevitability. It was nearly 3 when Whimsy reached his own room. Sleep hovered like a moth, possible but fragile. He removed coat and shoes, then stopped before the dressing-table mirror, considering. From a drawer he lifted a small velvet case, opened it, and extracted a slender silver whistle. The note it produced, were he to blow it, would be barely audible to human ears, but perfectly pitched for certain old servants of the Royal Flying Corps, and for Bunter, who, though absent on photographic duty in Paris, had trained his master never to underestimate whistle discipline. Whimsy smiled, set the whistle down, and reached instead for his pocket diary. A few lines of shorthand, a diagram of the back stair, a list of names, Ada, Toppling, Nurse, and beneath them a single question. Who prevents the truth, and who merely delays it? He underlined prevents. Then, almost as an afterthought, sketched 2 circles side by side, one labeled clock, the other egg cup, and drew a crooked arrow from circle to circle. His eyelids lowered. The arrow, wavering, resolved itself into the silhouette of a noose. He shut the book. He must have dozed, for when the knock came, daylight was pressing grey and insistent at the drapes. Ada's voice trembled from the passage. "My lord, Mr. Toppling says please come. Something dreadful in the pantry." Whimsy swung out of bed, shrugging on a robe, and hurried after her down the servants' stair. In the pantry doorway, Toppling stood rigid. Beyond him, a constable knelt beside a toppled milk churn. Gerald's body lay half-propped against the cold slab, pipe slipped from nerveless fingers, the brass torch still shining a pale circle on the ceiling. A thin foam flecked his lips. Grimswood arrived breathless. "Poison," he said at once. "Prussic, most likely. Smells of bitter almonds." Whimsy inhaled. Yes, the ghost of peach kernels and old photographs. He crouched, plucked the pipe. The bowl contained a wad of cotton soaked to blackness. He sniffed it, careful not to inhale deeply. "Lined with cyanide. Self-inflicted or planted?" Ada whimpered. Whimsy reassured her with a glance. "Run to Mrs. Brigg, my girl. No one else enters here." When she had gone, he rose and opened the pantry door to full light. On the slate shelf stood a half-eaten seed cake and a cup of cocoa, both untouched since supper. Next to them, a glass jar of apricot kernels, medicinal, labelled sweet almonds. A spoon lay across the lid, but the dust on bowl and handle was undisturbed. Whimsy bent lower. The dust, in fact, bore 2 small marks, like the punctuation of a thought. A semicolon impressed by fingertips. He straightened. He came here for milk, habit from his wartime ulcers. Someone prepared the pipe, knowing he would tamp it. A murderer bold enough to pass a constable. "Household only," Grimswood muttered. "Staff or family?" "Both." Whimsy looked toward the corridor where footprints overlapped in the flour Mrs. Brigg had scattered after last night's prowling. A new set, smaller than Gerald's and smudged at the heel, led away toward the cold store. "Fetch your photographer. We shall keep these prints before they are swept like everything else in Hemphill Court." He returned to the corpse, studying the angle of Gerald's arm, the pipe stem near his mouth. If suicide, he would grip the bowl. Fear hastens inhalation, yet his fingers rest loose. Pipe scarcely held. Someone placed it after breathing ceased. Grimswood's jaw tensed. So the killer is still in the house. Precisely, and has removed a useful witness. Whimsy's gaze went to the milk churn's side. There, nicked into the tin by a sharp instrument, was a single letter, S. He touched it lightly. Scratched in haste, perhaps as death wrote its signature. S for Simon, or for settlement, or simply save. He turned abruptly. "Inspector, double the guard on Colonel Talboys. Secure Sir Julian's papers. From this moment, no document leaves the house. And summon the household to the morning room at 8 sharp. We have a ghost to unmask, and he is becoming impatient." Grimswood hurried off. Whimsy lingered, eyes on Gerald's ashen features. "Forgive the delay," he said quietly. "But detectives, like clocks, must keep their own time. Yours has stopped. Ours advances." He covered the face with a tea towel, inhaled once more the faint scent of almonds, and stepped into the corridor where the sullen dawn pressed at casements, demanding illumination. By 8 o'clock, Hemphill Court resembled an Edwardian stage set awaiting critics. Chairs drawn in a wary semicircle, curtains half closed against drizzling daylight, and, at the room's throat, Lord Peter Whimsy, pacing with an absent-minded predator's grace. Inspector Grimswood stood sentinel by the mantel, notebook sheathed but gaze alert. On the fluted sofa, Sir Julian Talboys tugged at his cuffs. Beside him, Mrs. Brigg sat bolt upright, every hairpin broadcasting moral disapproval. Ada Winchell, pale but determined, had been placed between the butler and the night nurse. Miss Strickland, whose starch was so advanced one feared her collar might audibly crack. Colonel Talboys, wrapped in shawls and attended by a constable, occupied an armchair whose wings enhanced his exhaustion. Only Gerald's customary place remained conspicuously vacant. The absence did not need pointing out. It shouted like trumpets. Whimsy halted beneath a Gainsborough landscape. "I've asked you here because events have progressed from tragic to intolerable. Lady Talboys died yesterday under circumstances whose accidental appearance has already frayed. Last night Mr. Gerald followed her, by a less vertical route but equally final. We now balance on a cusp. Either confess what you know or wait until forensic minutiae betray you. And believe me, forensic minutiae are tireless chaps, rather like income tax men, only unbribable." No one ventured a sound. The grandfather clock in the corner plodded 2 deliberate ticks behind its neighbor on the chiffonier. Whimsy produced a folded sheet. "First, the matter of money. This onion skin, slipped beneath the colonel's door, requests Lady Talboys's posthumous signature, quite a feat for any pen. It concerns a revised settlement favoring Captain Simon Talboys, presently in Egypt but very much alive and penurious. Sir Julian, would you explain?" Sir Julian's face sagged into official regret. I wanted to protect the family name. Simon's debts threatened scandal. My bankers advised a voluntary settlement. Catherine, my sister-in-law, refused even to discuss it. Gerald drafted a memorandum so my brother might persuade her with figures in hand. Figures which exceeded her personal fortune. They reflected the worst-case demands, Sir Julian muttered, as though reading a particularly depressing balance sheet aloud in his head. Whimsy bowed slightly. "Let that rest. Next, clocks. Hemphill Court contains a rare assortment of horological falsehoods. An hour slow in the study, 9 minutes in the library, 5 fast above the pantry. Such intentional entropy serves only one business: alibis. On the night Lady Talboys died, someone required elastic time. Mr. Toppling, do you wind every clock?" The butler inclined his crane-like neck. "Only the main hall and dining room, my lord. Others are tended by their respective owners." "Precisely. Sir Julian's by Sir Julian, Gerald's by Gerald, fitting if one enjoys symbolic neatness. Now, the back stair." Whimsy's voice thinned a fraction. "A concealed servant's spiral threads this house, complete with spy peepholes. Lady Talboys used it. Ada discovered her there more than once. Someone, uncertain who, watched through it in turn. Miss Strickland, you sat with the colonel from 10 until midnight." Miss Strickland stiffened. "Yes, my lord. I left when he appeared to sleep." "And you returned when?" 5 minutes before 1. His cough had roused him. "Ada heard a door slam at that moment," Whimsy said. "Likely your entrance to the sick room. During your absence, the colonel could not have mounted secret stairs, but someone might have visited him, perhaps to plead for a signature, perhaps for something less legitimate." He shifted a chair fractionally, just enough to bring the scratched letter S on the pantry churn into view. Had Lady Talboys signed, this initial might be redundant. As it stands, it may denote the next intended signatory, or the killer's chosen scapegoat. Sir Julian attempted outrage, but produced only a wheeze. Colonel Talboys stared at the mark as though it threatened to uncoil and strike. "It isn't Simon's doing," he rasped. "My cousin may be reckless, but he worshipped Catherine." "Very likely," Whimsy granted. "Yet worshippers may benefit materially when idols topple." He turned to the butler. "Mr. Toppling, you slid an envelope under the colonel's door at 20 past 11. Contained what?" Toppling's knuckles whitened on his livery buttons. "A typed statement, my lord. Blank spaces for Lady Talboys's initials. Mr. Gerald asked me as a courtesy. He said the colonel was expecting it." "Did Mr. Gerald instruct you to post a second document after Lady Talboys' fall?" "No, my lord." who then returned to the pantry with him. Flower on the tiles records 2 sets of prints. One large, his. One smaller, diagonal at the heel. Female. Miss Strickland, pray examine your shoes. The nurse flushed brick red but complied. Her crepe soles bore no flour now. Mrs. Briggs' overnight zeal had polished them, but a faint crease at the heel matched the curious angle. Whimsy accepted one shoe, measured the tilt with a small ivory rule, and laid it beside a police photograph of the pantry prints. The alignment dovetailed. Miss Strickland wet her lips. "He summoned me," she said at last. "He said Colonel Talboys had relapsed, that he needed advice on dosage. When we reached the pantry, he seemed distracted. Searching shelves. I found no medicine there and returned. That is all. All save a pipe tampered with cyanide." Whimsy's tone remained courteous, but the edge glittered. Cyanide derived, likely, from apricot kernels. One jar stands in that very pantry. A competent nurse would recognize the smell in seconds. Yet you departed calmly and left him to smoke. The nurse straightened her shoulders. "Because I did not know," she whispered. "I swear it. When I left, he was alive." So he was, and within 10 minutes he was not. Either you or someone entering after provided fatal encouragement. We shall determine which by laboratory report. Whimsy glanced at Grimswood, who nodded. He had already dispatched the jar and pipe to Gloucester. Ada's hands twisted in her lap. "Please, my lord, Mr. Toppling he wouldn't hurt anyone." "No one has accused him," Whimsy answered gently. "But courage does not always choose the right champion." He faced the company once more. "One last disclosure before breakfast. Among Gerald's effects I discovered a poem, unfinished, sadly. It begins, 'Silk in the darkness slips like water. Fate, like a hand, draws tight the cord. The meter limps, but the sentiment limps further. A man writing of strangulation while his employer's wife walks floors in silk.' He wrote it, however, 3 weeks ago, when Lady Talboys still entertained ordinary restlessness rather than fatal peril. I suggest Gerald was no murderer. He was blackmailed by knowledge, perhaps overawed by a stronger will, but working, ultimately, for the wrong conscience." Silence settled with the weight of damp wool. Colonel Talboys coughed, harsher than before. "Peter, Lord Whimsy, tell them." Desperation cracked his voice. "I dreamt I saw her ghost last night. That's why I ran, to find her, to beg forgiveness because I let fear rule me. That stare, she showed me weeks ago, said we could escape the other's schemes. But I was too weak." He gripped the shawl. "The man she feared was still alive after she died. Now he is dead. It can't be Simon. He's continents away." Whimsy stepped forward, placed a hand on the colonel's shoulder. "Courage, old fellow. Ghosts are often bodily. Gerald's killer, like Catherine's, remains within these walls, but cornered animals bite indiscriminately. We must close the corners." He turned to Inspector Grimswood. "Lock every external door. Collect every latch key. No servant leaves, no telegram sent save through your desk. Have the typewriter ribbon sealed. Fingerprints on single keys may speak. We will reconvene at luncheon, by which time I anticipate clarity." Sir Julian rose, trembling. "You treat us like prisoners." "Merely passengers whose compartments have been mislabeled," Whimsy replied. "The guard will correct the tickets in due course." His eyes, normally light with banter, now resembled polished steel. "Go to your rooms. Rest, if you can. And ponder whether silence serves you better than speech. Past noon it may serve you worse." One by one they filed out. The nurse lingered, then curtsied with sudden humility. "I will tell you everything," she murmured. "But not—" She glanced at Sir Julian retreating. "Not in front of them." "In the library at 10, Whimsy said. "Bring any papers you hold." She vanished. Ada slipped through next, leaving a scent of lavender and panic. When only Whimsy and Grimswood remained, the inspector rubbed his brow. 2 deaths, half a dozen motives, and a manor erupting like a boiler. Are we closer? Whimsy smiled almost tenderly. Within a hair's breadth. Whoever killed Gerald believed his silence essential and acted before dawn. That means either they overheard our conversation last night, or they feared Gerald would confess regardless. Either way, they watched us watch him. He tapped the mantel clock, adjusting it 3 minutes forward. When people manipulate timepieces, they reveal how they feel about time. Our murderer belongs to those who cannot bear an uncontrolled minute. Let us grant them a few uncontrolled hours and see what spasms of repair follow. He picked up the scratched churn photograph, studying the lonely S. I fancy, he said, almost to himself, that this letter is not an initial at all. It is shorthand, an incomplete word. Something a dying man tried to finish before windpipe and nerves refused him. Gerald, poor wight, had been composing bad verse all night. Even at death his mind turned to language. Seek, perhaps? Or SOC? Pity the alphabet is so long. Grimswood raised an eyebrow. Secret? Society? Settlement? Choose one and watch the pattern adjust like a kaleidoscope. Whimsy slipped the photograph into his pocket. Library at 10, Inspector, and bring the chemist's preliminary. If cyanide crystals lack fingerprints, our murderer wore gloves. Gloves, as you know, leave other traces. Fibers on a pipe stem, perhaps? Or dew wiped off an orchard branch? Forgive the pun, but I smell a hand in this. Left alone for a moment, he stood amid the hush of shuttered portraits, listening. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked in a corridor. Somewhere below, the pantry clock chimed a minute too soon. The house seemed to draw a long, troubled breath. Whimsy's smile returned, faint and sardonic. My dear Lady Talboys, he whispered to the room, sleep in what peace you can manage. By tea-time we shall have your justice, served, I trust, with lemon and not cyanide. With that benediction he crossed to the door, his shoes silent on the Persian rug, leaving only the incongruous echo of mismatched clocks to tick, bicker, and gradually betray the secrets of Hemphill Court. Inspector Grimswood's constable, dutiful and damp about the temples, deposited the chemist's preliminary at 5 minutes past 10, thus arriving 185 seconds later than a freshly corrected hall clock swore he ought. Whimsy accepted the envelope with the abstracted air of a man handed the final pawn for a half-played chessboard and, without unfolding it, slipped into the library. Miss Strickland stood already by the window where greenish light bled through aged glass. Her stiff collar had wilted into a melancholy parenthesis, and in her gloveless fingers lay 2 creased pages. I shan't take long, she whispered, as though afraid the books might overhear. I kept notes, case notes, at Lady Talboys' request. She feared she was losing her reason. She asked me to observe. Whimsy gestured to a chair, remaining upright himself. Begin with the fear. She believed someone entered her room while she slept. Small objects moved, a brooch shifted, curtains parted, the French latch raised, though still bolted. Strickland's composure wavered. I soothed her, suggested she dreamt, but then I saw the latch myself, unbolted from the inside. And one night, round 2, I heard a tread in the hidden stair. Lady Talboys was in the corridor, trembling. We listened. Footsteps, a cough, then silence. She made me promise never to leave her unattended again after 10. And yet you left the Colonel alone last night. The Colonel insisted on laudanum. He could barely speak. When I checked at midnight, he seemed unconscious. I slipped to Lady Talboys' room, not 3 minutes. She was not there. The bed unslept, robe gone. I ran to the back stair but heard nothing. I searched until past. Then, the nurse's shoulders drooped. I panicked. If the household discovered I'd abandoned the Colonel, well, my position would be forfeit. So I said nothing. Whimsy opened the chemist's note. I doubt your position is presently enviable. Still, honesty's a late bloomer, better plucked than left. He scanned the page. Cyanide crystals in the pipe confirm apricot derivation. Trace of menthol resin on bowl exterior. Used to mask odor. No fingerprints, but cotton wool wrapper bears fine lint of yellow floss silk. Interesting. Your uniform lining is cotton, Miss Strickland. Silk belongs rather to the domestic staff or to gentlemen's pocket squares. Not to me, she said firmly, meeting his gaze. Whimsy nodded. Did Gerald frequent the Colonel's room before yesterday? Often. He read correspondence aloud when the cough worsened. The Colonel's hearing is poor. Gerald would lean close. Her face twisted. Lord Peter, I think Gerald loved Lady Talboys, hopelessly, perhaps secretly, but devotedly. Those poems were for her, not about murder. She encouraged him because she had no one else to trust. He'd bring her books, speak with her on politics. She said he treated her like an intellect, not an obstacle. Whereas others treated her as both obstacle and wallet. Whimsy accepted the 2 creased pages from Strickland. The handwriting, fine, forceful, was Lady Talboys. The date atop, 3 days past. If anything befalls me, the note began, look to the clocks and to those who speak of charity with expense sheets in their pockets. I fear a design in which my accident may prove convenient. At the bottom, a final line. B. Whimsy tapped the initial. Who is B? I don't know. She would not say. Enigmatic to the last. He tucked the pages in his pocket. Thank you, Miss Strickland. A statement to Inspector Grimswood, please, with these pages attached. She rose, relief mingling with dread, and left the room. Whimsy, alone, allowed himself a sigh broad enough to cushion a small philosophy, that truth, like port, required decanting, lest Lee's cloud judgment. A mutter of voices drifted from the hall, Grimswood directing constables, Sir Julian protesting the sequestration of inkpots. Whimsy stepped out, signed for the nurse's statement, and requested the constabulary photographic box. Then he sent Ada to fetch the butler. Toppling arrived mortally affronted by daylight without decanter accompaniment. Mr. Toppling, Whimsy began, your loyalty is as hard-wearing as your coat lapels. But loyalty, improperly hung, becomes complicity. You conveyed Gerald's papers. You managed the salver. You alone could enter rooms unremarked. Did you set the clocks? The butler's jaw made a slow descent before recovering. No, my lord. Did you enter Lady Talboys' bedroom after her death? The pause was infinitesimal, but it existed. To lay a shroud and lift her jewelry case for safekeeping. While there, you erased a footprint from the balcony rug and removed a cigarette butt from the ashtray, one that smelled of Turkish tobacco. I feared such an article might distress Sir Julian. The grand voice cracked on the title. Or incriminate him, Whimsy asked softly. Toppling's shoulders sagged. I serve the family, my lord. I conceal what harms its name. Even murder. Tears smarted in the old man's eyes, surprising them both. Not murder. I never thought it murder until Mr. Gerald. Forgive me. I forgive freely. Justice is less accommodating. Whimsy dismissed him, then strode back to the pantry with Grimswood. Together they knelt by the milk churn and re-examined Gerald's final letter. Whimsy produced a tiny lens, studying the incised S. Note, the downward slash thickens halfway. Blade hesitated, changed direction. Gerald was slumping. He began a second letter. He traced faint scratching beyond the first. L, I think. So SL. Not settlement, not Simon. But perhaps SLIP? Slipknot? Or Sally... Wait. He peered closer. Serifs, he whispered. This is no L. It is a T begun, then broken. He etched invisible strokes in air. ST. Saint, he breathed. The beginning of Strickland. Or stairs. Grimswood frowned. If he incriminated Miss Strickland, why invite her to pantry? because he trusted her and tried, in final seconds, to write what he had just learned. Stairs. He saw his killer emerge from secret stair, followed, was silenced. But the first letter, YS. Stair begins with S. Yes, but could also be secret stair. We are chasing semantics. He closed his lens. Let us test chronology. Between Gerald's leaving his room and nurse's summons, 20 minutes passed. Ada, powdering floors, saw no one cross but heard the library clock strike 1 minute after pantry shriek. Library clock note is 9 minutes slow. Therefore death occurred at 12 minutes past 5. Household time, but actually 21 past. Who among us owns a perfectly set watch? He swept into the hall where Sir Julian hovered. Your pocket watch, sir, Whimsy requested. Sir Julian produced it with reluctant flourish. Whimsy compared to his own. Sir Julian's lagged 9 minutes precisely, the library's deviation. When did you last wind it? Whimsy asked. Last night, before retiring. And before or after you tampered with the library clock? The question rang like a dropped rapier. Sir Julian's face blanched. I never. An hour earlier, you erased fingerprints from its glass, Whimsy continued. Chemist's dusting shows smears of brandy on the brass bezel, your habit after late toddies. You slowed it 9 minutes to match your watch, thereby proving to yourself you were on time when you were actually too early, specifically in the pantry corridor at 12 past 5, where Ada's flower recorded pads of a slipper rather larger than her own. The deputy undersecretary tried for hauteur and achieved only breathlessness. I wished only to confirm Gerald's confession. He threatened exposure. Exposure of what? Sir Julian's reply wilted into silence. Whimsy pressed. The charity settlement was camouflage. Gerald discovered your true design to swallow Lady Talboys' fortune, claim benevolence to settle Simon's debts, then, when Catherine refused, arrange her fall and drive Maurice to early grave by poison, masked as laudanum. Gerald balked. You bribed or threatened him. His conscience revolted. He feared you. He asked Nurse Strickland to help convince Catherine. When that failed, he resolved to speak. You scented danger. Sir Julian lifted shaking hands. Prove it. I intend. Whimsy drew out Lady Talboys' note, held it high. She wrote this. Look to the clocks and to those who speak of charity with expense sheets in their pockets. Be she signed not for Basil Gerald, but for blue books, your parliamentary fetish. She saw through you and recorded it. Ada will testify she watched you exit the secret stair 2 nights ago. Toppling retrieved Turkish stubs from your study ashtray. Strickland confirms you alone supplied the colonel's laudanum, tincture adulterated by brandy that worsened his heart. Finally, Chemist's lint of yellow floss silk belongs to your monogrammed pocket square. Gift from the board's retirement committee. Sir Julian sagged against the banister, lips parted like a man meeting altitude. I never meant, he began. Then faltered. Catherine was unreasonable. She blocked every sensible step. I merely corrected matters. Basil became hysterical. I acted to contain hysteria. And contained it mortally, Whimsy said. Inspector, you may wish to formalize. Grimswood advanced. Cuffs clicked. Sir Julian offered no struggle, only a slight shiver as constables took his arms. Ada, watching from the threshold, burst into soundless tears. Colonel Talboys, leaning on the nurse, closed his eyes as though a tourniquet had loosened. Before Grimswood escorted the prisoner out, Whimsy addressed him once more. A final pedantry, Sir Julian. Cicero said, Salus populi suprema lex esto. Let the welfare of the people be the supreme law. One might add, a law even deputy under-secretaries may not rewrite by sleight of clock. The door closed on footsteps and jangling keys. A hush fell so complete that the mismatched clocks could be heard arguing anew. Whimsy turned to the household, voice suddenly gentle. "Now the mechanism stops. We may set all hands to the same hour. Nurse, see the colonel rests. Toppling, cocoa for Miss Winchell, and perhaps a drop of something sterner for yourself. Ada, when ready, you will put lilies in Lady Talboys' room. She liked them, did she not? Good. Let them be fresh. Deceit, at least, should rot first." He watched as they dispersed, limping, weeping, steadied by duty. Only when the passage emptied did he retrieve his hat from a side table and glance once toward the back staircase, the hidden door invisible among carvings. A faint draught sighed. The house, realigning itself after long dislocation, seemed to breathe evenly for the first time. Whimsy placed the hat, squared it to a jaunty yet respectful tilt, and descended to the drive where Inspector Grimswood waited to convey his prisoner into the Gloucester van. The rain, having spent its spite, now fell in a fine apologetic mist. "Curious thing, time," Whimsy remarked, opening his umbrella. "We mislay it, stretch it, even murder by it. Yet in the end it unrolls us all with devastating punctuality." Grimswood nodded, half smiling. "And detectives? Oh, we merely keep up as best we may, like tired ushers at an eternal performance. But at least," he added, stepping beneath the portico, "the next act rarely starts without us." He saluted, light as the departing rain, and strolled toward the Daimler, where Cook, chastened but punctual, had the engine already ticking in perfect time. Cook nosed the Daimler down Hemphill's dripping drive at a decorous crawl, the elms shaking sequins from their leaves, but Whimsy soon requested a halt halfway to the lodge. The place where Lady Talboys had been wont to sketch, the little stone bench, facing an ornamental pool, lay just beyond a shallow arch of laburnum, and now, even under pewter sky, a single yellow petal still clung to the wood. Whimsy stepped out, umbrella idle at his shoulder, and walked the gravel with the tentative tread of a man entering a sick room unannounced. He needed, he told himself, to certify that the last cog truly meshed, that Sir Julian's arrest would settle the machinery. Yet he knew that what drew him was simpler, a private courtesy to the dead lady who had fought her household clockwork until it crushed her. The pool was blurred with rain rings, lilies submerged like muffled voices. Whimsy stood gazing at his own watery reflection, then reached into an inner pocket and produced the small silver whistle. He turned it over once, a habit when thought outpaced words, and recalled the flying corps afternoons when silence had meant waiting for engines that might never return. Those engines usually had a bunter at the throttle. Now Bunter was in France, while Whimsy found himself custodian of a Gloucestershire tragedy with no one immediately on hand to straighten cuffs or chronicle victuals. Perhaps that accounted for the ache behind the wryness. Footsteps squelched up behind him. Grimswood, duty done but curiosity unslaked, had followed at a respectful distance. "You left the line rather suddenly, my lord," he said. "I preferred an encore to an ovation," Whimsy murmured. "Trials and committees will see to the applause. Have you posted someone for Captain Simon when he lands in Southampton?" "Telegraph sent. We'll speak to him before news sheets do. Might clear the air, though I doubt he's directly involved." Indirect involvement often kills fastest. Whimsy flipped the whistle into his palm, but Simon will mourn sincerely, which the prosecution will not relish. They prefer villains neatly signed and sealed. Grimswood breathed steam. "You're satisfied Sir Julian acted alone?" "Morally, yes. Mechanically, largely. But he drew strength from a wider conspiracy of acquiescence, the sort that flourishes in respectable houses. Toppling hid evidence, Strickland hid absences, Gerald hid conscience until conscience bit. Evil plus silence equals miracle, a corpse that looks like chance. He half smiled. No jury ever convicts silence, alas, though occasionally it hangs itself in Parliament. A rook cawed overhead. Whimsy tucked the whistle away. "Come, Inspector, we've left Cook idling. He may reverse himself into fresh horticulture." Back in the Daimler, he dozed, the rhythm of wipers lulling thought, until Gloucester's outskirts rattled him awake. At the station house, Sir Julian, pallid and prematurely aged, was being booked with bureaucratic solemnity. He lifted his eyes as Whimsy passed. There was no plea, only baffled distaste, as though an error of ledger-keeping rather than homicide had brought him there. Whimsy returned a fractional nod, the salute one might give to an opponent who had resigned before mate. By noon, Cook had turned for London. The rain cleared somewhere beyond Swindon, and Whimsy unfolded the Times of that morning, scanning headlines about French reparations and a Royal Academy furore. Reality, briskly unperturbed, marched on. In the margin he scribbled questions for Parker at Scotland Yard. Whether a Board of Trade pension could be sequestered after a murder conviction. How long a civil servant's papers were held under privilege. Whether laudanum prescriptions required duplicate dispensing records. Each item, prosaic and precise, seemed a little tombstone for grandeur. At Reading, he shut the newspaper and stared instead at hedges streaking back from the window. Country houses, he mused, endured shocks much as geological strata did, accumulating pressure quietly until a fissure yawned. Clocks could be reset, carpets replaced, servants rehired, and yet, some night years hence, Ada might pause on a dim landing and hear an imaginary cough, a memory that would never quite cease clearing its throat in the dark. The thought pricked him. Presently, he bade Cook stop at a telegraph office, wrote a brief message, and dispatched it to Bunter in Paris. If free by week's end, collect Miss Ada Winchell from Hemphill, escort to Mrs. Bunter's establishment. Battersea, think she would flourish under sane employment. PDBW. Sentiment, he told himself, but a luxury Lord Peter might afford when not at war. Evening brought him to 110th A Piccadilly, smelling faintly of apple mould and petrol. The flat, tended by a temporary manservant, felt strangely stripped without Bunter's microscopic order. Whimsy made coffee, badly, and carried it to the sitting-room where, through tall windows, lamps along Green Park glittered like studs on a morning cuff. He sank into the club chair, boot-toes toward the fire, and allowed the mental autopsy to restart. Each motive weighed, each exchange of glances re-examined, Sir Julian's decisive moment pinpointed amid a lifetime of administrative half-tones. When the coffee cooled, he replaced cup and saucer and reached instinctively for the telephone. Parker answered from the yard with reassuring drabness. Whimsy summarized. Parker whistled, and the two old friends quarreled amiably over whether a man as methodical as Sir Julian would crumble on remand or stiffen into bureaucratic obstinacy. Parker thought the latter, Whimsy the former. They agreed to wager a box of cigars. After hanging up, Whimsy crossed to the bookshelves, extracted a slim volume, Meditations of Aurelius, and opened at a place marked years before by a theatre ticket. If thou art pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs thee, but thy own judgment about it. He shut the book. Marcus, he decided, had never been responsible for footprints in flour or for comforting a butler whose world had slid off its pedestal. Toward midnight he wrote 2 letters. One to Colonel Talboys, conveying a promise that the adoption papers the Colonel and Catherine had considered would be expedited by a fellow at the Home Office. The second, longer, to Captain Simon, a careful composition balancing condolence with warning that speculation would swarm. He ended both with the same line from Sophocles, in Greek to amuse himself. Time sees all, and he reveals all. Sealing the envelopes, he felt the machinery at last wind down. No click, no flourish, just a faint, stilled tick where a racing second hand had been. He left the letters for posting, switched off the lamp, and slipped through the black-edged silence to his bedroom. Yet sleep refused him. Shortly after 1 he rose, pulled a great coat over pajamas, and padded barefoot to the balcony. The city, under thin moonlight, hummed like a kettle too far from the flame to boil. He leaned on the iron balustrade. Behind him, the rooms were dark. No secret stair, no falsified clock threatened. Still, he coughed once, testing the night. The sound vanished into London's endless crevices, as innocuous as dust. For a moment he imagined Hemphill Court, its corridors scrubbed clean, Miss Strickland dispensing bromides, Colonel Talboys learning to walk orchard paths without dread, and lilies paling quietly on Catherine's dressing table. Perhaps, he reflected, some houses healed, though bricks could never forget. He flicked ash from an imaginary cigarette, then chuckled at how theatrical even solitude could become. "Go to bed, Peter," he told himself aloud. "Ghosts clock off too." Inside, he set his travel clock carefully, precisely to the second, wound it with practiced economy, and placed it where its tick would anchor the drifting moments. As he extinguished the bedside lamp, the clock's pulse filled the room. Unhurried, impartial, insistently alive. Whimsy smiled into the dark. "That," he murmured to the mechanized air, "is what I call keeping time." Lord Peter woke to a pale wedge of April sunlight that had slipped between curtain and sash and settled, with architectural precision, across his pillow. It reminded him of the silent service staircase at Hemphill Court, a sliver of brightness slicing darkness, but here in Piccadilly the ray was innocent, unburdened by murders or misset clocks. He lay still a moment, listening for the reliable tick of his travel clock, and decided that when machinery kept proper time, a man might safely confront the day. By 9, fortified with coffee brewed by the stand-in valet, a conscientious but unimaginative fellow who quarter-measured the grounds, Whimsy walked to the club for post. On the way, he noted the advertisements pasted to omnibuses, racing tips for Newmarket, a new play at Wyndham's, the promise of patent digestives. London, as always, displayed perfect amnesia. Yesterday's scandal already softening into anecdote, and tomorrow's mad scheme bright with poster paint. He supposed Gloucester, too, was shrugging itself back into ordinariness, though Inspector Grimswood would be steering the paperwork like a dray, horse through molasses. At the club, 3 envelopes awaited him. The first bore Captain Simon Talboys' bold military scrawl. The second, the discreet watermark of the Home Office. The third, unmistakably, Bunter's even hand on Continental stationery. Whimsy pocketed them, content to save a small suspense with his eggs, and turned to the morning papers. The Times carried 3 inches on Sir Julian's arrest. No opinions, merely the fact of remand. The Daily Mail indulged a larger headline, hinting at clock conspiracy and county calamity, while the Express preferred brother-in-law bingo plot, as though Catherine's estate were a seaside pavilion. Whimsy winced, not for Sir Julian, who had earned his headlines, but for the nuance steamrolled by newsprint. He shut the paper and opened first Bunter's letter. Bunter, Hôtel de l'Europe, Boulogne. My lord, photographic commission complete. Kindly note I embark upon the 4 p.m. packet and arrive Victoria 6 p.m. Should your lordship require me earlier, telegram. Suggest the smaller camera be serviced. Shutter lag evident in last negatives. Then, in a postscript of unusual warmth, am delighted to make arrangements for the young lady specified. Mrs. Bunter reports a vacancy in the Battersea household. Respectfully, M.B. Smiling, Whimsy tucked the note away. If the whole world ran to Bunter's punctuality, half his detective labor would vanish. The Home Office envelope contained a bureaucratic courtesy. Colonel Talboys' fostering application, long mired, would be expedited. On advice received from Lord Peter Whimsy, we are satisfied. Exceptional grounds exist. Whimsy imagined Maurice Talboys, frail but upright, greeting an Irish orphan and teaching the boy the orchard paths free of phantoms. The scene warmed him more than the eggs. Captain Simon's letter came last, its edges spattered with desert dust. "My dear Lord Peter," it began, "your telegram reached me at Port Said and hit like a shell. Kate, dead. Julian, accused. I sail for England at once, but meanwhile, you have my authority to act as family trustee. Julian's debts to me are of no account. Spare whatever may remain for Morris. I was a fool to let them drag Kate into the settlement wrangle. If I had written her, perhaps, well enough. Only tell me, did she suffer? And are you quite sure it wasn't some devil from outside, a prowler? I can't picture Julian with blood on his hands." Whimsy set the pages down. Outside the club window, a sandwich board man tramped by, hawking treasure hunt cigarettes, ignorant of tragedies not measured in pounds, shilling, pence. Lord Peter signalled for a fresh pot, but his appetite had followed Captain Simon out to sea. He penned a quick acknowledgment. "She died instantly. We have proof beyond reasonable doubt. Return, but keep your courage for the Colonel." He sealed it, rang for a page boy, and dispatched both, letter and an order for the patented digestives, to be forwarded to Maurice Talboys with the doctor's assent. One did what one could. That afternoon, Bunter arrived, whisker neat, bringing with him the missing note of absolute symmetry. Whimsy submitted himself gratefully to Bunter's coffee. "No, my lord." The substitute employed a water ratio bordering on sacrilege, and listened as his man recounted Ada Winchell's journey from Hemphill to Battersea. The girl, it seemed, had slept through half the train ride and awakened with shy astonishment to find London real and welcoming. "Mrs. Bunter already has her reading menus and teaching needlework, my lord. She's a very quick learner." "Excellent. Does she ask about the case?" "Not directly, my lord, but she spoke of clocks. Says she will never again trust any chime after dark." "Well," Whimsy murmured, "I dare say London chiming after dark has misled more innocent creatures than Ada. But if she hears Big Ben strike 13, tell her it's only the government resetting itself." By evening, Parker telephoned to say Sir Julian had attempted initial plea bargaining. Manslaughter, diminished responsibility, the usual opening gambits, and the Crown had declined. "The Treasury solicitor likes your horological evidence," Parker concluded. "He says it will make a jury feel clever." Whimsy laughed. "If only clocks guaranteed moral clarity. Still, I'm gratified. Did our man crack at the second interview?" "Not visibly. He claims Catherine tripped of her own accord. The cyanide he blames squarely on Gerald. Poetic despair. As for laudanum dosage, he asserts the nurse exceeded prescription. One must hope the jury reads Marcus Aurelius. He who lies to himself is worse than he who lies to others. But the Daily Mail may suffice." They set a date for the next club luncheon and rang off. Whimsy spent the succeeding days in oscillation, half devoted to the Crown's brief and half, less admittedly, to the shock of moral aftertaste. Murder cases, even triumphantly solved, left sediment. So he answered backlogged correspondence, lectured at the bibliophiles on early Flemish bindings, and twice joined Charles Parker for discreetly unpublicized billiards. Yet each quiet moment slipped him to thoughts of alder-scented staircases and a silk thread caught on bramble. A week later, the Talboys matter returned, unbidden by telegram. Colonel Talboys had died, heart failure, peacefully, the doctor said, in his sleep. Whimsy lowered the flimsy. He had suspected the heart would not wait for verdicts, but still it jarred. Parker came over that night, and they drank Burgundy with scant talk. "We clear the path," Whimsy said at last, "but often there is no one left to walk it." "There'll be a boy in that orchard now," Parker reminded him. "It isn't nothing." 2 months passed before the trial. Spring had folded into early summer. Whimsy attended the Old Bailey only on the first day, quietly observing Sir Julian in the dock, palms pressed together as if still debating amendments to a bill. The prosecution laid out the clocks, the poisoned pipe, the forged signatures, and Sir Julian's methodical nudging of every mechanism save conscience. Strickland's testimony proved crisp. Toppling broke down halfway and sobbed that he should never have hidden the Abdullah butt. Ada, brought in simple print dress, spoke of the silk rustle on the stair, her wide eyes drawing murmurs from the gallery. There was little for defense to demolish. After that, proceedings resembled a train's last unstoppable glide into terminus. Whimsy did not stay for the buffers. Instead, he walked out into the clatter of Ludgate Hill. Bunter met him with the car. "Verdict tomorrow, my lord," he asked as he settled behind the wheel. "Guilty," Whimsy said. "Perhaps with a recommendation, but guilty. Justice marches to a bass drum once the melody is clear." He asked to be driven to Battersea. At Mrs. Bunter's cheerful terrace, Ada sat on the doorstep plucking clumsy bars on a borrowed ukulele. On seeing Whimsy, she sprang up, instantly courteous. "They've wired from the orphanage, my lord," she blurted. "A little boy, Michael, is coming to the Colonel's solicitor Tuesday. I helped sew sheets for him." "Then Hemphill may yet hear laughter before winter," Whimsy said. He spoke a moment longer, gave Ada a tiny watch he had kept since France. "Just mind the mainspring, it gains if you scold it," and returned to the car. Twilight painted the embankment lilac. Bunter drove without chatter, reading his master's introspection as fluently as Morse. At Chelsea Bridge, Whimsy broke silence. "Bunter, would you say clocks govern most lives?" "Clocks, my lord, and appetites." "And what governs clocks?" "Tampering fingers, unless prevented." "Quite." Whimsy settled back, letting London's lamps run like golden beads along the Thames. "Well, here's to prevention, and to appetites properly timed." "Yes, my lord," Bunter said, turning into Piccadilly. "Dinner at 8. "Make it 7:58.5, replied Lord Peter with the faintest laugh. "I feel daring." He stepped from the car, paused a second under the portico to savor the exactness of his own absurd instruction, and then went in, leaving night, city, and former alarms behind him, all ticking onward at their several imperfect paces toward whatever intervals awaited. Whimsy woke early, not from sleep, but from a dream where time had fractured into endless shards, each second sharp as broken glass. The memory of Hemphill lingered still, a faint pulse beneath the surface of London's steady heartbeat. Today would settle what had begun months before. Today, the final thread would be drawn taut. He dressed with deliberate calm, each movement a measured step, in a well-rehearsed dance, starched collar, dark suit, watch wound precisely. Bunter arrived punctually, their usual unspoken harmony a quiet comfort. Together, they drove toward the Old Bailey, the city unfolding around them in morning light. Shops opening, hansom cabs rattling, life oblivious to the weight of a single verdict. Inside the court, the air was thick with expectation, though the galleries held only a modest crowd. Sir Julian Talboys sat motionless, a statue carved from regret and resignation. The judge, grave and patient, called the court to order. Evidence had been laid bare, witness statements etched into record. What remained was the final act, an unexpected development, a revelation to tip the scales. Whimsy rose, his voice steady but quietly compelling as he addressed the court. "My lord, ladies and gentlemen, we have accepted that Sir Julian's hand administered the poison. Yet there is one shadow the prosecution overlooked, the orchestrator behind the clockwork." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Whimsy's eyes met Sir Julian's briefly, an acknowledgement of shared burden. He went on, recounting the overlooked detail. The missing prescription records, the curious absence of certain correspondence, the subtle but deliberate misdirection by a trusted housekeeper, Mrs. Strickland. Her loyalty had not been blind, but bargained. Evidence from letters intercepted and deciphered by Bunter revealed a clandestine alliance, a desperate scheme to manipulate the Talboys' estate by an outside party who stood to gain far more than any family member. Whimsy laid out the final piece. A telegram sent under a false name, timed precisely to provide Sir Julian with a fabricated alibi, and a series of ledger entries altered to conceal the true source of the cyanide. The courtroom held its breath. Mrs. Strickland, summoned for questioning, faltered under scrutiny and confessed, her actions driven by blackmail, her hand forced by a shadowy intermediary seeking to unseat the family's control. The verdict was swift. Sir Julian, though culpable in act, was revealed to be a pawn in a larger, more sinister game. His sentence was mitigated, the court acknowledging the coercion and manipulation that had orchestrated the tragedy. Outside, Whimsy and Bunter walked in the bright afternoon sun, the weight of resolution settling between them. Justice, Whimsy mused, is often less a thunderclap than a steady, unrelenting ticking. It wears away deception, second by patient second. Bunter smiled. And the appetite for truth, my lord, is the only hunger worth feeding. Whimsy glanced back toward the city skyline, where time marched on imperiously but justly. Let us hope, then, that all clocks, like men, can be reset. With that, they turned homeward, toward quiet rooms, measured moments, and the peaceful certainty of time well kept.